Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It is Thursday, July 13th, 2023, 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific. We are kicking off our 9th season and our 72nd series of episodes with our current feature. And tonight, it's the film Joyride, released in theaters this past Friday. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts for the evening, and very excited to be finally kicking off our 9th season. It's been a very overwhelming year so far, just personally. So we're off to a later start than we like, and it looks like with everything going on, we're only going to get 2 sets of episodes in this month, and I think we can do another one in December. Everybody's very busy. Hopefully 2024 will be a little better. But I'm very excited to kick things off. It's episode 72.1 tonight, this discussion of Joyride. And I've got some co-hosts with me tonight to talk about this film. First, ladies and gentlemen, an all-business sound designer who does a film review show with his wacky friends, Matthew Polis is here.
Hello, Jonathan.
Hey, he's got the blur going, so his hand was blurred when he said hello. So that was a weird effect. Also with us, ladies and gentlemen, another film reviewer and soap opera star obsessed with K-pop, Angelo Santos is here.
Hey, everyone. Hey, JB. Hey, Patty.
All right. So, guys, here is the schedule for this. It's going to be our 72nd series of episodes. It starts, of course, tonight with our review of the current feature. Joyride continues this upcoming Monday, July 17th, with a review of the indie spotlight, Minding the Gap, from 2018. And our classic movie discussion will be next Thursday, July 20th, with Michael Powell's Black Narcissus. And on Monday, July 24th, we'll have our 56th Sound Off, in which we'll do a tweet beat. Patrick will do a Below the Line segment. And Devin and I will count down our top 5 films from 1947. And so now the big question is, who is drinking with me here at 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific? I've got Voodoo Ranger, an Imperial IPA, and I've got a new Goonies bottle opener that I'm going to use for the first time here. Now that we're, friends with the Aston family, we should, try to celebrate the Goonies there. So I got this one. What do you guys got?
I don't have anything. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Angelo, you drinking with me?
Got a vodka and cranberry.
Nice! Vodka and cranberry. Here is the drinking slide for the audience. These are things that you came up with to drink to when we do them on the show. Anytime I say all-time contrivance, verisimilitude, or diegesis, or anytime Matt Polis makes fun of me. Angelo is still a little new to the show, so the audience hasn't come up with anything for him quite yet. All right, Angelo, you ready for a summary?
Sure. Let's go.
Chinese adopted daughter of white parents who takes her childhood friend Lolo with her on a business trip to China. While there, they decide to connect with Lolo's unusual cousin Deadeye and Audrey's college friend Kat, who is now a popular local soap opera star. The trip segues to becoming about finding Audrey's biological parents, which sets them on a cross-country adventure in the homeland. It's time for opening thoughts. Matty Polis, 1 sentence or less. How did you feel about Joyride?
This is a film that goes for laughs at all times and at all costs. Unfortunately, the jokes rarely landed with me.
Angelo, what about you?
While the ride started fun, it didn't seem to go the way I would have liked.
For my opening thoughts, I have, it's more important than it is successful. And maybe we'll dig into that. And so as we start the discussion, we always try and start positive. And I think, for me, I'm going to say I think some of the performances, everything in the film is a bit of a mixed bag. And I think that Angelo was sort of alluding to that to some degree. Some of the performances were pretty strong and were the best part of the film. And as far as I'm concerned, Ashley Park herself is the best part of this particular film. She's perfectly cast as the mostly straight man, if you will. She seemed to understand the tone and, most importantly, crafted the most complete character. I think we get a fuller sense of Audrey, her wants, her needs, her complexities, insecurities, etc. All this in a broad comedy where some folks, and I think Matt alluded to this, some folks play the jokes instead of the character. Park doesn't do that. And so I think she gives a pretty successful performance. Angelo.
I mean, I thought she was great. I didn't know her from anything before. She was a pleasant surprise.
Where are you on Ashley Park in this film?
She was just fine. I think she was the most grounded character and the most sort of authentic person, which there's a very low bar in this movie for that to happen. So she did stand out by comparison.
Okay, so now we're going to dig into some of the other characters that I didn't like as much, or at least their performances. And you would expect, coming off an Oscar nomination, Stephanie Hsu would be the standout in this particular film, but I think she felt really out of sync with this character, which is surprising given her improv background. Maybe she was doing something right and the others were doing something wrong. Whatever she was doing didn't seem to work. Her timing seemed off. She didn't land the jokes, nor did she carry her character's needs and conflicts from one scene to the next. It felt like a very muddled performance from that point of view. Maddie Polis, so Stephanie Hsu, the soap opera star.
All the characters kind of just blended together, and they each had like reasons for giving a joke, like in particular in the moment who would be the biggest laugh, and then she was one of them. And I don't really have much to say on her specifically.
Angelo, Stephanie Hsu.
I would agree with you on that, Jonathan. I didn't see anything special in her performance. I think she may have been miscast in terms of the sexuality of the character, or not sexuality, but the sexual,
the over-sexuality.
Yes, yeah.
I think there's something to that. She seemed very uncomfortable with that element of the character, and that character can't be that, out of sync. I don't have much to say on the others, and Matt even said that they blended together. So my next section about performances just says the others, because I don't have a lot. So they had some funny moments, but like I was saying for Stephanie Hsu, they never felt like complete characters, meaning they were one-dimensional, defined by their respective comic flaws. In the writing, for sure, but a good actor, and I'll give an example in a second, a good actor take that one-dimensional on the page character and bring life to it and add detail. So actors can add to a one-dimensional character, and neither of these actors did. Sherry Cola's Lolo character was one-dimensional on the page, and that's all we got from her. Someone thought of some funny character ideas, but it's Cola's job to round that out to a person, I think. Similarly, Sabrina Wu's Deadeye seemed like she was meant to be the Melissa McCarthy of this film. But McCarthy's Oscar-nominated character in Bridesmaids was the example that I was referring to, is an actor bringing more to a one-dimensional character. Melissa McCarthy, in that movie, Bridesmaids, started out with a character flaw and built out. And I feel like that's what Sabrina Wu needed to do. To me, Wu just played the flaw, which led to some funny moments, but to mostly hollow moments. And I'll go back to Angelo to start. Sherry Cola or Sabrina Wu, if you got anything on either of them.
I actually liked Sherry Cola. I didn't know who she was, so I had to look her up after. I think for me, it felt it was more her character than her performance. Where I think her character was more one-dimensional. Her story was like, I'm going to be the best friend supporting you, and there's and then she's also sort of sexual too, and it's like, yay, okay, what else?
There was something to that, and we'll talk about the T word, like some of the stereotypes they're trying to undo. So for you, would you say Sherry Cola was your favorite, even more than Ashley Park?
I think so, yeah. I think because she piqued my interest the most, where I was like, oh, who's this actress? And maybe it's because she's sort of like your unconventional Asian actor on screen,
In terms of a look, she had a different look than what we normally see from the Asian community. Okay. Maddie Polis, anything on either of those other actors in the foursome?
The Deadeye character, I didn't like when you compared it to
Melissa McCarthy in Bridesmaids.
Which, I mean, she's got like a personality, and she can do things in a personality for an entire film, even on a high concept film like Bridesmaids, maybe. But in this case, you said Deadeye has like a flaw, and she keeps playing that flaw. I'm not convinced she has a flaw. I feel like she has a flaw per scene, whatever would fit the circumstance. I couldn't figure out. She kept changing so many times in very extreme ways that I'm not sure what her one flaw was, what her characterization is supposed to be. It seemed like one thing and another, and just sort of like for laughs and over the top, whatever. Kind of making fun of her at all times. So I wasn't sure really what she was supposed to.
In this case, I perceived the flaw of her character to just be so extremely socially awkward. Like that's sort of, how I interpreted it, and that manifested itself in different ways. But to your point, I didn't believe it. It never felt real. It felt like a gimmick.
Yeah.
I do think that there is a responsibility of an actor to figure out what that flaw is. What I tell my acting students is when you play comedy, in any given moment, you're playing a character's flaw. Even the very best comedy starts with a character flaw. That's the very base. Usually, the most common flaw in comedy is stupidity. Overconfidence is another very common flaw you play when you're playing comedy. Their flaw was a little bit muddled, but I do think there's a responsibility of these actors to try and understand what the flaw is and then build out from there. Angela, anything else on the performances before we move on?
No. Which
brings us to direction, and I'm going to start with tone. And Maddie referred to this in opening thoughts, I believe, and he'll stop me if I'm misrepresenting him. But what I have in my notes here is the direction often eschewed logic in favor of the extreme gag. As I mentioned, I feel like it often went too far, which speaks to a larger tonal issue. I get the point. Lots of different genders and ethnicities can do gross out humor too. But humor isn't just about pushing the envelope alone. And that concept got lost somewhere along the way. As a director, the performances were mixed, as discussed. So I feel like Adele Lim needed to give more help. Aside from a random forced K-pop fantasy sequence thing at the midpoint, there's little to no visual style of the film. It's basic set coverage, which is sometimes okay, but there wasn't really any usage of the mise-en-scène or the form overall to explore either the themes, the story, or the humor. I didn't feel like Adele Lim was in complete control of this situation. Maddie, what do you think?
Yeah, and also this is kind of like an editing thing, but I don't think we go into editing specifically. So I would just say that it felt like slow and boring despite the apparent high energy, just because it was one note. It's kind of like this thing that kept happening, and there's like another set piece, and there's like, okay, and I kind of like we call it faded out after different scenes and like waiting for the next thing, waiting for something to happen, and nothing actually happened. They were just sort of going from comedic set piece to comedic set piece.
That's almost like a writing thing. I think, to some degree, stupid, because that's probably there, but they felt so disjointed. As you're creating the scenes, you're trying to be aware of, all right, what is this scene coming from and what is it going to, and how you link them all together. You need to shoot that stuff. Angelo, anything on Adele Lim?
I agree with you in terms of the tone. Like this story, I didn't really know where it was going. They were trying so hard to be a comedy, but then they were trying to go for the drama. It was just muddled, and yeah, I think it was just unfortunate that she didn't drive in one direction.
The word that you use that keeps coming to mind for me is muddled. It's not a great word when talking about a film. I use it more often than I would like, but it applies more often than I would like. It certainly applies here.
On the positive side, I would say I do like the energy and the elements of the transitional moments and the environmental location shots. Like you have the maps, for example, and the fonts. There's some stylization there for transitional things, which probably nothing to do with the original whatever, but it's a layer on top that I appreciate as I went through, because it was like a nice little eye candy and musical moments, and there were some bits of energy there.
And some of it was educational too, in terms of just learning more about China.
Yeah. I think I like your opening statement, because the direction for me, it's like, I think the intent was good. Like, well, let's deal with like, identity and cultural integration and stuff like this with something that's easy to swallow. The problem is that became such a side note. There's no characters or plot to like have it really happen. It was just sort of the concept without any content.
Yeah, and I'm gonna dig into that even more in the T word.
I almost felt like the comedy was like all the raunchiness was forced. The storyline that I could have got involved was about the identity and where you come from and finding all that, right? You could still instill comedy into that storyline. I just don't think it was done correctly.
Guys, I'm gonna move on to screenplay, and it's funny because I always feel like we always save the weakest element for last, and on the current release shows in particular, I feel like the script is always last. And I don't know what that says about modern screenwriting or just the current features that we wind up reviewing, but I do feel like the screenplay is always the last thing. And I think something that we've all said is I like the concept. An Asian girls road trip movie. Like, I would buy that at a pitch meeting. Like that idea, culturally and potentially comically. But the story itself was highly contrived and really stretched to achieve its plot goals. It's reverse engineered and you can feel it. In terms of the humor, the film is only occasionally funny to me, and Matt mentioned that, but not ever funny enough, and it's transparent and forced. Personally for me, and I'm not that sensitive, but I do think it went too raunchy, too gross, dramaturgically speaking. There is some depth to that, which we'll get to in the T word, but it's as if the raunch were the spoonful of sugar to make the message feel less preachy. But they wound up putting too much of that raunch in the witch's brew. It overwhelmed the story and the message. Imagine your coffee with 2 extra spoonfuls of sugar. It becomes gross and you don't want to drink it anymore. Not that I drink coffee, I don't. But like any movie, there's a recipe, which is a balance of things. And this one was way too salty, way too sugary, if you pardon the illusion. Maddie Polis, you were making some gestures. The screenplay.
Well, to take your analogy of the example of the Asian road trip, which is a good one, and the high concept, which is certainly what this film is, it's like we're watching that road trip the entire time from an airplane, watching it drive away. We're never in the car with them, metaphorically speaking, hearing and seeing them and doing things. And the humor was more important to this movie's director and writer than the characters and their actual relationships and motivations were.
And journeys, yeah. for sure. So I love that we've got metaphors going. I had a coffee metaphor. You had an airplane metaphor. Angela, what's your metaphor for this?
My metaphor is the driving, since it's a ride, so we're driving, and they were being driven everywhere, just not, they weren't driving themselves. I think that was part of the problem with the screenplay.
I think they're driven to craft services more often than they should have.
Angelo, I know I made you do a metaphor as a joke, but do you have any comments on the screenplay?
It's just all over the place. I wish they just should have focused on that storyline of her identity and finding her history. And yeah, the raunchiness threw me out. Like, that first scene had me laughing. I'm trying to still figure out where it went wrong, where I just kind of lost interest,
Where it went wrong is it continued.
Exactly. And then it was just like, even though we loved seeing the other cities, I wish they, I'm going to compare it to a girls' trip where the girls, they just went to New Orleans, but then that movie had a lot more character development, and there was a focus on the friendship, and mainly the two were underdeveloped. They really had no story except for just being there for almost, comedy relief that didn't work.
Angelo, talking about that cultural identity thing, I doubt you watched our top 10 from last year, but one of the films that made both my top 10 and Mel's top 10 was a film that I did bring up in the Oscar preview that you were on, as from a Best Actress point of view, in terms of Best Actress should have been nominated. I brought up this actress Park Ji-min from this film Return to Seoul, and you hadn't seen it then. I'm wondering, it's been a few months. Have you seen it since?
I have not, but I've heard of Outside From You.
I was about to say, yeah, you heard of it. I told you about
it. No. People have talked about it in my circle, so I was like, oh, I really should see it. Of course I did.
It has the same plot in terms of searching for a birth mother or parents. Korea instead of China, but still. You were talking about that as maybe they should have focused on that more. Yeah. And so that's what made me mention Return to Seoul to you. Maddie, it's time to move on to your favorite segment. What's it called?
T-word. What? Themes? Oh.
Yes, it is time for the T-word. This is where we talk about the themes of a film. Back in the old days when we had J Money and Davey didn't like to talk about themes. It made the film too much like homework, and so we had to dance around it, call it T-word. A segment was born. Here we are, and I'm going to start with the theme that we've danced around a little bit, and that's cultural identity. Because to me, it feels like this film wanted to be about Asian identity as these mostly American women confronted their heritage. But what it then becomes about is an Asian American identity, which is almost more interesting because it's this blurry middle ground that affects the characters in different ways. And again, I'm making a distinction between Asian identity and Asian American identity. At least as depicted in the film, it's almost as if they are outsiders in both places, seen as Asians in America and Americans in Asia. And the question becomes with how to cope with those perceptions. Which culture to identify with, and how does that affect who I am as a person? And does it need to? Does our cultural heritage need to define our personalities, goals, and life path? One of the film's clear goals was to address, undo, and in some cases, mock stereotypes. And in that, it was actually successful to my mind. It helped us start to think of these women as neither Asian nor American, but just some really messed up chicks struggling to get by, just like the rest of us. Angelo, cultural identity in Joyride.
I think it was there. I don't know if it was the main theme for me. Yeah, it was definitely one theme. It could have done better.
I have another theme coming that maybe that becomes your main theme. But in terms of it could have done better, tell me from your point of view why.
So, coming from an Asian background, and what you said is actually exactly true. When you're Asian American, you feel like you're an outsider in your homeland, and then sometimes you feel like you're an outsider here in America. They did try to address that. Within that culture, I think family is more important than family is part of the heritage, and they did sort of tackle that as well. I wish they would do that more.
Matt's initial point was right. They had stuff to explore, and they chose the jokes instead. But as far as cultural identity is concerned, Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
I thought your theme was going to be vaginal tattoos.
You were hoping my theme was going to be vaginal tattoos.
I was hoping. I feel like what you said, both of you said about feeling an outsider to your two parent homes, and you're sort of part of neither of them. And the film early on had that exact moment where I appreciated it. They were on the moving sidewalk of the airport and noticing different types of people, and then saying, well, I'm not one of those. Like, no, you're one of none of them. And that was a really nice moment early on in the film. Unfortunately, that was probably the most real moment of the film.
All right, so I'm going to move on to the other thing. Maybe this is Angela's main theme. I doubt it, because I thought this was a little bit more of a stretch. I got a little bit of concept about friendship. It's almost feels shoehorned in there in an almost formulaic way, in the sense of exploring the idea that as people grow, they also potentially grow apart from people they were friends with at one point in their lives. Is there an obligation to those people just because we were friends with them at different point in time in lives? For example, Maddie and I went to college together, and I don't think there's anybody else from college except for JW that I talked to. You know, we moved on from those people, so it's a natural process. But is there an obligation to those people? You know, the Hollywoody aspect of the film seems to suggest that we should stay connected to those people, or at the very least, accept who they become and be okay with the differences. But given the characters they set up, I almost wonder if a more mature and truer conclusion would see a mutual and amicable parting, acknowledging that they were different people and they really don't have a significant place in each other's lives. To me, that would have been more interesting, but not part of the Hollywood comedy formula. Angelo, I don't suppose this was the other theme that you had in mind.
This was not the other thing.
How do you feel about this friendship? And then I'll open it up to you.
I agree. It's just funny you bring that up. That now you just made me think about who in high school am I still talking to, and there are only two. I agree with you because you grow older, you kind of figure out who you are, but then you also figure out who the other people in your life is, your friends are, and how they fit in your life as you keep going. And you know, like sometimes people trail off, and sometimes some others stay. And it's also odd that the people you probably weren't close to in college and high school become closer to you as you grow older. You know, I think that would have been an interesting thing to explore also. But I don't know if. But I think you're right. It's the Hollywoody kind of.
Aside from that opening scene that everybody liked, they didn't feel like good friends. You know what I mean? Like they didn't feel like a good match to each other. It felt like the only reason that they were connecting is because they'd known each other when they were kids. And that was it. And there was nothing else really true about their relationship. Now, that has something to do with the writing. That has something to do with the chemistry as performers, potentially. But that didn't work. So that's why I'm wondering if they had decided that they really can live separate lives without needing to actively pursue this friendship further. That might have been more interesting, at least to me. Matty P, anything on friendship?
Clearly, they're all friends. They're supposed to be friends, but I didn't really see this as like a friendship themed movie per se.
The reason I included it is that's sort of the arc, right? Like that's sort of what it winds in terms of the, you know, like the actual script arc.
That's true.
Like that's sort of what it becomes, because it becomes about Sherry Cola's character and Ashley Park's character.
That's true. I mean, yeah, you're right. It's absolutely in the plot arc, but like she moves away to LA, and that's supposed to be affecting the other person. But I think they had to live in the same house for that to have any resonance with us. Like, oh, then where's she going to live? Like a factual thing, because there was no connection otherwise. So I didn't really get a sense of strong relationships, even though clearly, yes, you're right. It was about them coming together again or whatnot. But I did, in terms of that, I think for me, another theme with a social aspect, the only thing I liked about Deadeye was that she was very socially uncomfortable at various times, and sometimes like debilitatingly so, which is a good thing to show and see how she kind of struggles through that. Unfortunately, the results and how she coped with it was generally just over the top kind of nonsense. But I did feel for some of the things she said, like, I only have online friends who aren't coming to see me. And we're like, of course they're not coming to see you. And those are your only friends. And you felt for that kind of like isolation that sometimes we see people ourselves or people in our lives go through. I think those are real moments. And that character, despite the over the top nonsense, had the most real stuff to me in terms of what she's struggling with. And so I appreciated that social aspect, integration. Didn't really go anywhere real. It started somewhere or had moments of pockets of things. And so I identified them, but I'm not going to watch this movie for that, obviously.
I see your point for sure. And that's why I didn't include it, because it felt really underexplored. It felt like almost like an afterthought. It's ultimately the side character with this potentially interesting character detail that they did not explore, and certainly not in any real or honest way.
It's like they kind of characterize the issues too. Like if you're socially uncomfortable or isolated or shy, like all you have to do is overpower it with some sort of big show. And therefore,
big K-pop number.
And you arrive, and that's it. And like there's nothing to solve in those real circumstances, and it's not that black and white. But I liked her potential there.
Sounds like if we rewrote this script, we can do a really awesome job. Like we can really fix this.
I have a lot of time for that.
They should have hired us, I think. Angelo, you had another theme that you thought was the main theme.
I thought the main theme was being true to yourself.
There's an overlap there with cultural identity, right?
With the lead character, in order for her to be true to herself, she had to find out where she came from. More with Stephanie Shu's character, she has to admit her sexual past in order for her to move forward in her marriage. So I think that was a theme that could have been explored more with the other characters too, You
can connect your theme to this idea of identity to what Matt's saying, because her identity is wrapped up in her fear of connection. Like she only is able to connect with a handful of people. And there's, and only one of them is on this trip, For me, I felt like I sort of covered it in the cultural identity thing, in the sense that for a lot of them, they were connecting even the sexuality thing. I think that there's a stereotype for Asian women that they're more sexually repressed or something. Like, I'm trying to, maybe not the right word. For her to be a little more sexually active as a character, I think was meant to break ground. In all the muddle that we keep talking about, it didn't quite hit home. But I do think all of those things are wrapped up in this idea of being Asian American or Asian. Like, I definitely think there's a lot of overlap there. But I completely agree with you, and even to the point where I'll give you a bingo. All right, so it's time for closing thoughts, everybody. Angelo, you can go first.
My closing thoughts will go back to my opening statements, where the ride started out fun, but I just didn't know, and I still don't know where it's going.
So maybe it's got the wrong title. Instead of Joyride, it should just be Aimless Ride. Matty P, closing thoughts.
Strangely enough, this episode was probably funnier than this high concept comedy.
Nailed his closing thought. I love it. Definitely get a bingo for that one, man.
Where's the bingo?
That earned. That one is definitely an earned bingo. So congratulations. I think our next current feature is going to be not way back until Thursday, December 28th, 2023, in which we're going to review the Michael Mann film Ferrari when it comes out late this year. That'll be our next current feature. But our next show is this upcoming Monday, July the 17th, the Indie Spotlight, a film that made my top 10 of 2018, the documentary Minding the Gap. And that'll be with Devin and Jim. And that's this upcoming Monday night, July the 17th. All right, guys, let's say goodbye to the audience.
Bye.
Bye, audience.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.